When you think of a bad king, who comes to mind? For a lot of people, one name immediately pops up: King John of England. You probably know him as the villain from the Robin Hood stories, the greedy thumb-sucking lion in the Disney movie. But was he really that bad? Or is he just a victim of some seriously bad PR? Let's dive into the dramatic, disastrous, and surprisingly complex reign of King John. John was born in 1166, the youngest of 5 sons of the powerful King Henry II and the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine. Being the youngest in a royal family back then was tough. His father famously nicknamed him John Lackland because, unlike his older brothers, he wasn't initially given any land to rule. It was like being the last kid picked for the team, except the game was ruling medieval Europe. This nickname stuck and probably fueled a lifelong ambition to prove he was more than just the spare. His early life was a whirlwind of family drama. His older brothers were constantly rebelling against their father, and John, ever the opportunist, sometimes joined them. He even tried to seize the throne while his most famous brother, Richard the Lionheart, was away on the Third Crusade. When Richard was captured and held for ransom on his way home, John tried to bribe the Holy Roman Emperor to keep him locked up. Talk about sibling rivalry. But Richard eventually got out, forgave John, and named him his heir. So, in 1199, when Richard died from a crossbow wound, John Lackland finally became King John of England. Right from the start, John's reign was plagued with problems. First, there was the issue of his nephew, Arthur of Brittany. Arthur also had a strong claim to the throne, and many French nobles supported him. This led to a war. In 1203, Arthur was captured and mysteriously disappeared. While we don't have concrete proof, the popular belief then and now is that John had his own nephew murdered. Not a great way to start your reign, and it certainly didn't win him any friends among the French aristocracy. This incident was a turning point. Philip II of France used the scandal as an excuse to declare John's lands in France forfeit. John, who had a reputation for being a decent military strategist, seemed to lose his nerve. He fumbled his campaigns and by 1204 had lost the vast and wealthy region of Normandy, a territory English kings had held for nearly 150 years. This was a massive blow, not just to his prestige, but also to his wallet. The loss of Normandy earned him a new, less unflattering nickname, John Softsword. Ouch! Determined to win back his French lands, John needed money. Lots of it, and this is where he really started to alienate his own people. He squeezed his barons for every penny they had. He raised taxes to unprecedented levels, introduced new fines, and exploited his feudal rights in ways that were seen as tyrannical. He would demand huge sums for inheritance, force widows to marry men of his choosing, or charge them exorbitant fees to remain single. If you were a baron under King John, you felt like your personal ATM, and you were constantly overdrawn. His quest for cash also led him into a major conflict with the most powerful institution in Europe, the Catholic Church. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died, John wanted to appoint his own man, but Pope Innocent III had other ideas and appointed his own candidate, Stephen Langton. John refused to accept him. The Pope's response was swift and severe. In 1208, he placed England under an interdict, which meant no church services could be held, no baptisms, no marriages, no last rites. For the deeply religious people of medieval England, this was a spiritual catastrophe. John didn't back down. He seized church lands and revenues, basically telling the Pope, "Fine, I'll take your money then." This standoff lasted for years. Finally, in 1209, the Pope excommunicated John himself. This was the ultimate spiritual punishment, essentially damning the king's soul and, more importantly, releasing his subjects from their loyalty to him. Facing the threat of a French invasion backed by the Pope, John finally caved in 1213. Not only did he accept Langton as archbishop, but he also made England a papal fiefdom, acknowledging the Pope as his feudal lord. It was a total humiliation. By now, John's barons had had enough. They were tired of the high taxes, the lost lands, and the king's arbitrary and abusive exercise of power. They had been plotting for years, and in 1215, things came to a head. A powerful group of rebel barons renounced their allegiance to the king and marched on London. Outnumbered and with his back against the wall, John had no choice but to negotiate. On June 15, 1215, in a meadow by the River Thames called Runnymede, King John met with the rebellious barons and affixed his seal to a document that would change the course of history. That document was the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. Now, it's important to understand that the Magna Carta wasn't about creating a modern democracy. It was primarily a peace treaty designed to protect the rights and property of the elite barons, but within its 63 clauses were revolutionary ideas. Clause 39 famously stated that no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. This was a radical concept, the idea that even the king was not above the law. The king's power could be limited by a written document. Of course, John had no intention of honoring it. As soon as the barons dispersed, he appealed to his new best friend, the Pope, who declared the Magna Carta null and void. This plunged England into a civil war, known as the First Barons' War. The rebel barons were so desperate that they offered the English crown to Prince Louis of France, who promptly invaded. The country was in chaos. John was rushing around England, fighting the rebels and the French invaders. In October 1216, while crossing an estuary known as the Wash, he famously lost his baggage, train including the crown jewels, to the incoming tide. It was a fittingly disastrous moment for a disastrous reign. A few days later, sick with dysentery and worn out from the constant campaigning, King John died. He was just 49 years old. With John gone, the situation changed. The barons had less reason to fight. They preferred John's 9-year-old son, Henry, as their king over a French prince. The Magna Carta was reissued in Henry's name, and this time it stuck. It became a foundational document for the English, and later British, legal system. And its principles inspired countless movements for liberty and justice around the world, including the American Revolution. So, what's the final verdict on King John? Was he truly the worst king ever? Well, he was certainly unlucky. He inherited a troubled empire and faced a shrewd political operator in King Philip of France. He had a knack for making enemies and a terrible temper. He was greedy, untrustworthy, and probably cruel. The chroniclers of his time, mostly monks who weren't his biggest fans, painted a very dark picture. But he was also hardworking, intelligent, and an able administrator who took a keen interest in the justice system. The problem was that he used his intelligence and administrative skills to extract as much money as possible from his kingdom, often by bending and breaking the rules. In a strange way, his tyranny had a positive outcome. His abuses of power were so extreme that they forced the English nobility to unite and demand a check on royal authority. Without King John's disastrous reign, we might never have had the Magna Carta, a document that laid the groundwork for the rule of law and individual liberties. He was a terrible king, but perhaps he was the terrible king that England needed to set it on a path toward a more limited, more accountable government. A classic case of history's silver lining. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into King John's reign interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. See you next time.